Elite soldiers laughed at the poor veteran, until the general showed the same mark on his arm. Walter Thompson held tight to the yellow documents as he approached the main gate of the Fort Bragg military base in San Diego. At 63, his hands trembled not just from age, but from the anxiety of finally getting the medical care he so desperately needed. That's when the laughter started. 3 young soldiers guarding the gate looked at his faded clothes, his worn-out shoes, and the tattered military beret he insisted on wearing even after so many years away from service. "Well, look what we have here, guys," said Private Tyler, who couldn't have been more than 25. "Another one trying to pass himself off as a hero to get benefits. Good afternoon, boys." Walter tried to keep the dignity in his voice. "I'm here for my medical treatment. I'm entitled to it as a Special Forces veteran." The laughter that followed echoed across the courtyard, drawing other soldiers over to see what was happening. "Special Forces?" mocked Private Brandon, wiping tears from his eyes. "Man, look at you. You look like you haven't bathed in weeks." Walter looked down, knowing his appearance really wasn't the best. After he lost his job at the auto shop and had to sell his house to pay his late wife's medical debts, it had been hard to keep up his dignity. "Please, just look at my documents," he insisted, holding out the papers with his still trembling hands. The sergeant in charge of intake, Derek Matthews, took the documents with disdain and pretended to examine them. "It says here you served from 1978 to 1985, said Derek, glancing over the papers without real attention. "But there's nothing in the system about you. Must be a forgery." "That's not possible." Walter felt desperation growing. "I served for 7 years. I took part in important missions. I have proof." "What proof?" asked Tyler, still laughing. "You going to say you have a medal hidden at home?" The other soldiers joined the group, turning what should have been a simple intake process into a humiliating spectacle. Walter felt his face burn with shame, but he needed the treatment for his worsening heart condition. "Listen, I'm not making anything up," he tried once more. "I served in the Special Operations Battalion. I can prove it." "I'm sure you can," Brandon said sarcastically. "And I'm the President of the United States." The situation was becoming unbearable when Walter, in a desperate act, began to roll up the sleeve of his worn-out shirt. "You want proof? Then look at this," he said, revealing a peculiar scar on his right forearm. The mark had a very specific shape. It looked like a 5-pointed star, but with unique details that made it unmistakable. The edges were too precise to be an accident, and there were small dots around it that formed a geometric pattern. "So what is that?" asked Derek, trying to sound uninterested. "A tattoo you got to pass yourself off as military." "It's not a tattoo," Walter replied, his voice choked. "It's a mark that only a few of us received, a mark of honor I've carried for almost 40 years. The laughter started again, louder and crueler than before. "A mark of honor?" Tyler was enjoying himself. "Man, that looks more like a lost dog's tag." "Or maybe he burned himself with an iron," suggested Brandon, sparking a new round of laughter. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Walter closed his eyes, feeling the tears threaten to fall. This wasn't how he had imagined he would be treated upon returning to the place where he had dedicated the best years of his youth. "Please," he murmured, his voice almost disappearing. "I just need the treatment. I'm not asking for charity." "Oh, now you want to make a scene?" Derek was losing his patience. "Listen here, old-timer. Stop wasting our time with these stories. If you really served, where's the pension? Where's the recognition?" The question hit Walter like a punch to the gut. How could he explain that his pension was never approved because the records of his missions were considered classified? How could he tell them he'd spent decades trying to prove his service, but always ran into bureaucracies and files that could not be accessed? "It's complicated," he tried to explain. "The operations I participated in were secret. They don't show up in the regular records." "Secret," repeated Tyler, making air quotes with his fingers. "Sure, it's always secret when it's a lie." The humiliation was reaching its limit when one of the younger soldiers in the group, who had only been observing until then, stepped closer. "Hey, let me get a better look at that mark," said the soldier Brian, a young man who looked more serious than the others. Walter extended his arm again, allowing Brian to examine the scar up close. The young soldier gently touched the edges of the mark, seeming intrigued. "This is strange indeed," murmured Brian. "The precision of the cuts, it doesn't look accidental." "Don't be a fool, Brian," Derek interjected. "The guy probably did that on purpose to trick us." "But look at the color of the scar," Brian insisted. "This is very old. And the technique used, this isn't butcher's work." "Technique?" Brandon laughed. "Now you're an expert on scars." "My father is a surgeon," Brian replied seriously. "I grew up seeing this kind of thing. This mark was made with precise instruments and is at least 30 years old." The comment created a momentary silence, but soon the laughter started again. "Even if that's true," said Derek, "it doesn't prove he's military. Anyone can have an old scar." Walter felt the last spark of hope going out. He was about to give up and leave when, in a final act of desperation, he said something he shouldn't have. "Operation Night Falcon." The words left his mouth almost as a whisper, but the effect was immediate. Sergeant Derek stopped laughing instantly, and Brian's eyes widened. "What did you say?" Derek asked, his voice completely losing its mocking tone. "I said Operation Night Falcon," Walter repeated, louder this time. "March 1983, Colombia border." The silence that followed was so deep, it seemed the world had stopped. Derek looked at the other soldiers, who now seemed confused by the sergeant's sudden change in behavior. "You—" Derek swallowed hard. "You shouldn't know that name." "I don't just know the name," Walter replied, feeling a strange strength returning to his voice. "I was there." "That's impossible," Derek murmured, more to himself than to the others. "That operation, it never officially happened." "Of course it happened," Walter said, looking directly into the sergeant's eyes. "And you know that because your father was in command. Isn't that right, Sergeant Matthews?" The revelation landed like a bomb. Derek staggered back as if he'd been shot. How do you know about my father?" "Captain Robert Matthews," Walter continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "A man of integrity, courageous. He saved my life twice during that operation." Tears began to stream down Derek's face, who could no longer control his emotions. "My father never talked about that operation," he said, his voice trembling. "He only said he had participated in missions he couldn't discuss. And he was right not to talk," Walter replied gently. "They were different times, things we did to protect the country, but that had to remain secret." The other soldiers watched the scene without fully understanding what was happening, but sensing that something very serious was unfolding. "Sergeant!" Brian called out softly. "What's going on?" Derek wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to regain his composure. "I need to make a phone call," he said, his voice still unsteady. "You all stay here with him and treat him with respect." "But, Sergeant," Tyler tried to protest. "That's an order," Derek shouted, making everyone stand up straight. "Nobody touches him. Nobody speaks ill of him, understood?" "Yes, sir," the soldiers replied in unison, still confused but obedient. Derek ran off toward the administrative building, leaving the other soldiers and Walter in an awkward silence. The atmosphere had completely changed, but a tension still hung in the air that nobody knew how to handle. "Sorry about that, sir." Brian was the first to break the silence. "We didn't know." "Didn't know what?" Walter asked kindly. "You were just doing your jobs, protecting the base from suspicious people." "But we were disrespectful," Brian insisted. "We shouldn't have made fun of you." "Son, at your age, I would have found it strange too. An old ragged man showing up with stories from the past," Walter smiled sadly. "The problem is some stories are true even when they seem impossible." Tyler and Brandon remained silent, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. It was obvious they were beginning to realize they had made a serious mistake. "What is this Operation Night Falcon?" Brian asked with genuine curiosity. Walter looked toward the horizon, as if seeing something the others could not. "One of the most dangerous missions the United States military ever undertook," he said, his voice heavy with memories. 20 men went into the jungle. Only 12 came back. "And you were among those 12? Asked Brian. "I was," Walter confirmed, "but we paid a high price for it." Before the conversation could continue, they saw Derek running back across the courtyard, accompanied by an older officer wearing the uniform of a major. "Is it him?" the major asked Derek as they approached. "Yes, sir," Derek replied, still visibly shaken. "It's really him." The major approached Walter and studied him carefully, as if trying to recognize the features of a face from decades past. "Soldier Walter Thompson?" asked the major. "Former soldier," Walter corrected politely. "I haven't held that rank for a long time." "To me, once a soldier, always a soldier," the major replied with a smile. "Especially when it comes to someone who served with such dedication." "You know me?" Walter asked, surprised. "Not personally," the major explained, "but I know your story. And I know this mark." He pointed to Walter's arm. "Major William Parker," the officer introduced himself, extending his hand. "Son of Colonel Charles Parker." The name made Walter's eyes widen. "Colonel Parker? The mission commander?" "Exactly," the major confirmed. "And my father told me about you many times. He said you were one of the bravest soldiers he ever knew." The major's words moved Walter deeply. After so many years of being ignored and discredited, he was finally hearing the recognition he had always deserved. "Your father was a great commander," Walter said, his voice choked. "A man of honor." "And he said the same about you," the major replied. "In fact, he always regretted not being able to do more for the veterans of the operation. The secrecy restrictions prevented many things." "I understand," Walter nodded. "I always understood." The major then looked at the soldiers who were still watching the scene in silence. "Do you know who this man is?" he asked, pointing to Walter. "No, sir," Brian answered for everyone. "This man," the major began, raising his voice so everyone could hear clearly, "saved the lives of 6 Canadian diplomats who were being held hostage by guerrillas on the border. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It's a great help to us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the soldiers were dumbfounded by the revelation. It was impossible to reconcile the image of the humble man before them with that of a national hero. During Operation Night Falcon, the major continued, this soldier infiltrated the enemy camp alone, neutralized 8 guards without making a sound, and managed to free the hostages. "That's incredible," Brian murmured, looking at Walter with admiration. "But that's not all, Gus," the major went on. "During the escape, when they were discovered and surrounded, he stayed behind to give the others time to get away. He was captured and tortured for 3 days before the rescue team could reach him. The revelation about the torture sent a shiver down everyone's spine. Now the mark on Walter's arm took on a much darker meaning." "Was it during the torture that they gave you that mark?" asked Derek, his voice full of horror and respect. "Yes," Walter confirmed, unconsciously touching the scar. "They wanted me to reveal information about our military bases. They used a hot iron to brand me every time I refused to talk. The silence that followed was tomb-like. Everyone was trying to process the fact that they had spent the last hour making fun of a man who had been tortured while defending the country." "But why that specific mark?" Brian asked, clearly fascinated and horrified at the same time. "It was the symbol of the guerrilla group," Walter explained. "They branded their victims with a hot iron. They wanted me to carry this mark for the rest of my life as a reminder of what happens to those who oppose them. But it ended up being the opposite," the major observed. "The mark became a symbol of your courage and resilience." "I don't feel courageous," Walter admitted. "Most of the time, I just feel old and tired." "True courage," said the major, "isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you are afraid." Tyler, who had been one of the cruelest in his comments, stepped forward, his face red with shame. "Sir," he said, his voice trembling, "I apologize for what I said. I had no right." "You have the right to question," Walter replied kindly. "It's part of your job. What matters is how you act when you discover the truth." "But we were very disrespectful," Brandon finally spoke, also stepping closer. "You deserved much more consideration." "Boys," Walter smiled, putting a hand on each of their shoulders. "You're young. You have your futures ahead of you. Learn from this episode and move forward. That's what matters. The Major watched the scene with admiration. Even after everything he had been through, Walter still showed impressive generosity of spirit. "Mr. Walter," the Major said, "I'd like to invite you to have lunch with us today. I'm sure many here would like to hear your stories." "I don't want to be a bother," Walter replied, clearly flattered but still hesitant. "A bother?" the Major laughed. "It would be an honor for us." "What about my medical treatment?" Walter asked, remembering the original reason for his visit. "Oh, that," the Major made a serious expression. "I will personally make sure you receive all the care you need, and I will look into why your paperwork isn't showing up in the system." "Thank you very much, Major," Walter said, feeling enormous relief. "No, thank you," the Major replied, "for your service to the country." As they walked toward the mess hall, the soldiers made a point of accompanying Walter, now treating him with the respect he was due. Along the way, they passed other groups of military personnel, and the Major made sure to introduce Walter to everyone. "This is former soldier Walter Thompson," he said to each group, "a veteran of Operation Night Falcon and a national hero." The news spread quickly through the base, and soon Walter was being greeted by officers and soldiers of all ranks. Many wanted to shake his hand, others asked to take pictures, and some of the older ones shared their own service stories. During lunch, Walter found himself seated at the head table next to the Major and other senior officers. The food was simple, but for someone who had been having only one meal a day for the last few months, it seemed like a feast. "Tell us about the infiltration," a young lieutenant requested. "How did you manage to go unnoticed?" Walter chewed slowly, organizing memories from decades ago. "The secret was knowing the terrain," he began. "We spent weeks studying the guerrillas' movements, their guard change schedules, their weak points." "And what happened when you were discovered?" asked another officer. "It was during the escape," Walter continued. "One of the diplomats tripped and made noise. The guerrillas woke up and started shooting. I stayed behind to provide cover." "Weren't you scared?" asked Brian, who had joined the table. "I was very scared," Walter admitted. "But there were innocent people depending on me. I couldn't think only of myself." "And during the torture?" the Major asked gently. "How did you manage to resist?" Walter was silent for a moment, moving his food around with his fork. "I thought about my family," he said finally. "About my wife, who was pregnant at the time. About my comrades who trusted me. About the country I swore to defend." "Your wife was pregnant?" asked Derek, interested. "She was," Walter confirmed with a sad smile. "My daughter was born while I was missing. I only met her when I returned from the mission." "And where is she now?" asked Brian. Walter's smile vanished instantly. "She moved to Canada 15 years ago," he said, his voice low. "Married a Canadian. We have little contact." "And your wife?" "She passed away 3 years ago," Walter replied, wiping his eyes. "Cancer. It was a long and expensive fight." The table fell silent, everyone processing the information. The national hero they were meeting wasn't just a brave soldier, but also a man who had lost so much in his life. "Is that why you lost your home?" the Major asked kindly. "Yes," Walter confirmed. "I sold everything to pay for her treatment. I don't regret it, but when she was gone, I was left with nothing." "And your veteran's pension?" "I never managed to get it approved," Walter explained. "Since the operation was classified, there are no official records. Without records, there's no way to prove the service." "That's outrageous," said the Major, clearly annoyed. "I'll take care of this immediately." "I don't want to be a burden," Walter protested. "A burden?" the Major laughed. "You're entitled to that pension. It's the least the country can do for someone who sacrificed so much." After lunch, the Major took Walter to see other parts of the base. On the way, they passed the military museum, where there were some old photos of special operations. "Look at this," the Major pointed to a black and white photo. The image showed a group of young soldiers in field uniforms. In the right corner of the photo, a thin, serious young man looked directly at the camera. "Is that you?" asked Brian, who was accompanying them. Walter stepped closer to the photo and smiled. "Yes, it is," he confirmed. "I was only 22 years old at the time." "You were quite thin," observed Derek. "It was different back then," Walter laughed. Less white hair, more energy. But the look is the same, said the Major. Serious, determined. And look who's by your side. Brian pointed to another young man in the photo. Corporal Jose Mendez, Walter identified. One of the bravest men I ever knew. What happened to him? Asked the Major. He didn't come back from the operation, Walter replied simply. I'm sorry, said Brian. He knew the risks, Walter commented. We all did. But he died saving a wounded diplomat. He was a hero. The visit to the museum stirred many memories in Walter, some good, others painful. He told stories about every person in the photo, remembering not only those who didn't return, but also those who went on with their lives after military service. Some became business owners, he told. Others became teachers, police officers, firefighters. Everyone found their way. And you? Asked the Major. What did you do after the army? I worked in an auto repair shop for over 30 years, Walter replied. I always liked fixing things, understanding how they work. You must have been a good mechanic, he observed Brian. I was, Walter confirmed with pride. I had loyal customers, people who trusted my work. Why did you stop? Age caught up with me. My hands started to shake more, Walter explained, showing his hands. And when my wife got sick, I needed to spend more time caring for her. That must have been difficult, said Derek with empathy. It was, Walter admitted. But she did the same for me when I came back from the operation. She cared for me when I had nightmares, when I couldn't sleep, when the memories got too heavy. Did you suffer from post-traumatic stress? Asked the Major. I didn't know there was a name for it back then. Walter laughed sadly. I just knew that sometimes I'd wake up screaming, that I was afraid of enclosed spaces, that I couldn't stand to see hot metal, not even on a barbecue grill. And how did you get through it? With time, with patience, and mostly with my wife's love, Walter replied. She never gave up on me, even in the toughest moments. The conversation was interrupted when a soldier came running up to them. Major Parker, said the soldier, breathless. You need to take an urgent call in your office. Can it wait? The Major asked, clearly not wanting to interrupt the visit. It's from High Command, sir, the soldier insisted. They say it's about the veterans' situation. The Major looked at Walter with a worried expression. I'll have to take it, he said. But don't worry, it's probably something good. We'll go with you, offered Brian. No need, the Major replied. Stay here and show Mr. Walter the rest of the base. I'll be back in a few minutes. After the Major left, Walter continued the tour with the younger soldiers. They took him to see the training center where other recruits were practicing combat drills. Our training was like this too, Walter commented, watching the young soldiers, though we used much simpler equipment. Would you like to speak with them? Asked Brian. I'm sure they'd love to hear your stories. If you think it would be interesting, Walter agreed. Brian got the recruits' attention, and they stopped their exercises to listen. Everyone, Brian announced, I'd like to introduce Mr. Walter Thompson, a veteran of the Special Forces. The young soldiers gathered around curiously, forming a semicircle around Walter. Did you really serve in the Special Forces? Asked one of the recruits. I did, Walter confirmed, from 1978 to 1985. It must have been very different back then, observed another. It was, Walter agreed. We had less equipment, less technology, but we had something you have too, camaraderie and determination. What was the most difficult mission you were part of? Asked a third recruit. Walter looked around, seeing all the young faces full of expectation. He decided to tell a less detailed version of Operation Night Falcon. Once we needed to rescue important people who were in danger, he began. It was a very risky situation, and we knew that not everyone might come back. And how did you prepare? We studied a lot, Walter explained. Knowing the terrain, the enemy's schedules, every detail that could make the difference between success and failure. Did you feel afraid? Asked one of the youngest. Very afraid, Walter admitted without hesitation. Anyone who says they don't feel afraid in situations like that is lying. But then how did you manage to do what needed to be done? The secret, said Walter, looking directly into the young man's eyes, is not to let fear paralyze you. Feeling afraid is normal and even healthy. The problem is when fear stops you from doing what's right. And how do you know what's right? Asked another recruit. That's a difficult question, Walter thought for a moment. But usually, when you're protecting innocent people, when you're defending your comrades, when you're serving something bigger than yourself, you're on the right path. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Walter sharing lessons learned throughout his military career. The young soldiers seemed genuinely interested and touched by his humility and wisdom. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When Major Parker finally returned, he had a serious expression on his face, but his eyes shone with something that seemed like hope. Mr. Walter, he called, interrupting the conversation with the recruits. I need to speak with you. Of course, Walter replied, noticing the urgency in the Major's voice. They stepped away a bit from the group for privacy. The call was from the commanding general of the region, the Major explained. He learned of your presence here and wants to meet you in person. A general? Walter seemed surprised. He doesn't need to bother on my account. It's no bother, the Major assured. In fact, it seems your arrival here has caused quite a stir among the higher command. A good stir or a bad stir? Walter asked, worried. A very good one, the Major smiled. Apparently, there are very important people who know exactly who you are and what you've done for the country. That's hard to believe, Walter murmured. Why? Because I spent decades being ignored, having my service questioned, Walter explained. It's strange that suddenly people appear who know all about it. Perhaps, suggested the Major, it's because until now you've been talking to the wrong people. Before Walter could answer, they saw an official entourage arriving in the courtyard. 3 military cars stopped in front of the main building, and several high-ranking officers got out of the vehicles. That's him, the Major warned, General Augustus Miller. Walter swallowed hard, suddenly feeling nervous. It had been decades since he'd been in the presence of a general, and his current appearance wasn't exactly appropriate for an official meeting. Major, he said, touching his worn clothes, I'm not dressed properly to meet a general. Don't worry about that, the Major assured. The general isn't a person concerned with formalities. They walked toward the main building, followed by Brian, Derek, and the other soldiers who had witnessed the day's events. The tension in the air was palpable. General Miller was a man of about 60, with graying hair and an impeccable posture. When he saw Walter approaching, he stopped talking with the other officers and focused all his attention on him. So you are Walter Thompson, said the general, extending his hand. Yes, sir, Walter replied, shaking the offered hand. It's an honor to meet you in person, the general said, surprising everyone with his deference. The honor is mine, General, Walter replied, clearly uncomfortable with so much attention. Can we speak in private? The general asked. Of course, sir. They entered the building and went to a meeting room. The general asked that only he and Walter remain alone. Please, have a seat, the general offered, pointing to a comfortable chair. Walter sat down, still trying to process the whole situation. I know you must be confused by all this attention, the general began, but I need to explain a few things. I'm listening, sir. Operation Night Falcon was classified as top secret for almost 40 years, the general explained. Only a handful of people in the high command knew the details. I understand. But 2 years ago, the government decided to declassify some old operations, the general continued. When the Operation Night Falcon files were opened, they caused quite a stir. Why? Because they discovered that one of the soldiers who participated in the operation never received the recognition he deserved, the general answered. You. Walter felt a lump in his throat. The files clearly show your role in the operation, the general went on. The heroism, the sacrifice, the torture you suffered, everything is documented. But why did no one look for me before? Because you were listed as deceased, the general revealed, leaving Walter shocked. What do you mean, deceased? When you disappeared during the operation and weren't found for 3 days, they presumed you had been killed, the general explained. When the rescue team finally found you, you were in very serious condition. I remember that, Walter confirmed. The doctors weren't sure you would survive, the general continued. For security reasons, they decided to officially maintain that you had died in the operation. To protect my identity. Exactly. They feared the guerrillas would try to take revenge if they knew you had survived, the general explained. It was a temporary measure to be reversed after the situation stabilized. But it was never reversed, Walter concluded. No. The years passed, other priorities came up, and you ended up forgotten in the files, the general admitted with regret. It's one of the greatest injustices I've seen in my career. And now? Now we are going to correct that, the general said with determination. You will receive all the honors you deserve, your pension will be settled with back pay, and your name will be cleared in the official records. Walter was silent for a long moment, absorbing the information. It's hard to believe, he said finally. I understand, the general replied. But there's more. More? The president of the country wants to meet you in person, the general revealed. He was very impressed with your story when he learned the details. The president? Walter's eyes widened. Yes, he wants to hold an official ceremony to recognize your service to the country, the general explained. It will be a way to offer an official apology for the years of neglect. I don't know if I deserve all this, Walter murmured. Of course you do, the general insisted, and much more. May I ask a question? Of course. How did you find out that I was alive and where to find me? Walter questioned. It was by chance, the general admitted. One of the officers responsible for declassifying the files was researching the operation's participants. He found records showing you had been admitted to public hospitals several times in recent years. Because of my wife's health problems, Walter understood. Exactly. Your data was in the health system, so it was possible to track you down, the general explained. When they discovered you were alive and in a vulnerable situation, they decided to act immediately. But how did they know I would come here today? They didn't, the general smiled. Your arrival here was truly a coincidence. We were planning to look for you at your residence. I don't have a residence anymore, Walter admitted with embarrassment. I know, the general said kindly, and that makes the situation even more urgent. We can't allow a national hero to live on the streets. I don't want to be a burden to the government, Walter protested. Burden? The general laughed. You are a national treasure. It's the country's duty to take care of those who took care of the country. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Come in, the general authorized. It was Major Parker, with an expression of urgency. General, he said, there's a call for Mr. Walter. A call? Walter was surprised. Who would know I'm here? It's from your daughter, the major explained. She's calling from Canada. Walter paled. He hadn't spoken to his daughter in over a year. How did she find out? He asked. It seems the news of your presence here spread, the major explained. Someone posted on social media about the veteran being honored at the base. Can I talk to her? Walter asked, clearly emotional. Of course, the general stood up. Use my telephone. We'll wait outside. Walter was left alone in the room and, with trembling hands, picked up the phone. Dad? The voice on the other end was choked with emotion. Jennifer? Walter could barely speak. My daughter. Dad, I saw on social media, she was crying. I saw you were being honored. Why did you never tell me you were a hero? I'm not a hero, daughter, Walter replied, also crying. I just did what I had to do. I'm coming back to the United States, she announced. I'll buy the ticket today. You don't have to do that, Walter protested. You have your life there. My life is with my father, she replied firmly. I made a terrible mistake abandoning you when you needed me most. You didn't abandon me, Walter assured. You went to live your life. That's what I wanted for you. But when my mother died, I should have stayed with you, she insisted. Instead, I ran away to another country because it was easier than dealing with the pain. Jennifer. No, Dad. Let me speak, she interrupted. I always knew you were special, that you had stories you didn't tell. Mom sometimes mentioned your nightmares, the scars you tried to hide. Your mother knew about some things, Walter confirmed. And now I know too, she said. I'm so proud to be your daughter. I've always been proud of you, my girl. Dad, forgive me for being an ungrateful daughter, she asked, sobbing. "There's nothing to forgive," Walter replied, wiping his own tears. "You are my greatest achievement in life." "I'll be there tomorrow," she promised. "And this time I'm not leaving again." "But your job, your life—" "I can work from anywhere," she explained, "and my life only makes sense if you're in it." The call ended with both crying, but it was a cry of joy and reunion. Walter stayed alone in the room for a few minutes, trying to process everything that was happening. When he finally went out, he found the general and the major waiting in the hallway. "Everything all right?" the major asked, seeing Walter's red eyes. "Better than I ever imagined possible," Walter replied, smiling through the tears. "Is your daughter coming to visit you?" the general asked. "She's coming back to live in the United States," Walter announced, still in disbelief. "She wants to stay close to me." "That's wonderful," the general smiled. "A family reunited." "General," Walter said, his voice gaining strength, "I want to do something in return for all this kindness." "You don't need to do anything," the general replied. "I want to help other veterans," Walter insisted. "During all these years, I've met many men who served the country and were forgotten, just like I was." "That would be very valuable," the general agreed. "Your experience could help a lot of people." "I could work as a counselor or an advisor," Walter suggested. "Help veterans get their benefits, deal with trauma, reintegrate into society." "It's an excellent idea," the general approved. "I'll arrange an official position for you here on the base." "Thank you, General. This would give me a purpose again." "Walter," the general said, putting a hand on his shoulder, "you never lost your purpose. You were just waiting for the right opportunity to show it again." They returned to the courtyard, where a small crowd had gathered. The news about the heroic veteran had spread all over the base, and soldiers of all ranks wanted to meet him. "Everyone," the general called for attention, "I would like to officially introduce former soldier Walter Thompson, hero of Operation Night Falcon." The courtyard erupted in applause. The same soldiers who had mocked Walter just hours before were now applauding him with genuine respect and admiration. "Sergeant Derrick," the general called. "Yes, sir." Derrick stepped forward, still visibly shaken by the day's events. "I want you to prepare a special ceremony for tomorrow," the general ordered. "A proper tribute for Mr. Walter." "Yes, sir," Derrick agreed. "It will be an honor to arrange that." "And soldiers Tyler, Brandon, and Brian," the general called the three of them. "Yes, sir," they replied in unison. "You learned an important lesson today," the general said. "I hope you remember it for the rest of your careers." "Yes, sir," they confirmed. "General," Brian stepped forward, "may I make a request?" "What is it?" "I would like Mr. Walter to be our instructor for military ethics," Brian suggested. "I think we could all learn a lot from him." "That's an excellent suggestion," the general approved, looking at Walter. "What do you think?" "It would be an honor," Walter replied, clearly moved. The rest of the day passed quickly. Walter was taken to see other parts of the base, had lunch again, this time as the guest of honor, and spoke with dozens of people who wanted to hear his stories. In the evening, when it was time to leave, Major Parker offered him lodging on the base. "I can't accept," Walter protested. "You've already done so much for me." "Nonsense," the major insisted. "You are our guest of honor. Besides, your daughter arrives tomorrow and you need to be here for the ceremony. If you're sure it's no trouble." "Trouble?" the major laughed. "It's a privilege." Walter was settled into a simple but comfortable room in the officers' quarters. It was the first time in months he had slept in a real bed, in a clean and safe place. Before sleeping, he spent a long time looking out the window, watching the young soldiers passing through the courtyard. He thought about all the events of the day, how his life had completely changed in just a few hours. He thought about his late wife, wishing she were alive to see his recognition. He thought about his daughter who was returning to the United States. He thought about the comrades who didn't return from the operation. And for the first time in years, Walter Thompson felt at peace. The next morning, he was woken early by Major Parker. "Good morning," the major smiled. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," Walter admitted, stretching. "Good, because we have a full day ahead," the major explained. "Your daughter arrives at noon and the ceremony will be at 3 in the afternoon." "Ceremony?" Walter hadn't fully processed it yet. "An official tribute," the major explained. The General has invited several dignitaries, including some survivors of Operation Night Falcon. Other survivors? Walter's eyes widened. Who? It's a surprise, the Major smiled mysteriously, but I'm sure you'll be happy. After breakfast, Walter was taken to get properly prepared. A new military uniform had been arranged in his exact size. How did you get my size? He asked, amazed. We have our methods, the Major laughed. Besides, every veteran deserves a proper uniform. When Walter looked at himself in the mirror, he almost didn't recognize himself. The impeccable uniform, the decorations in the right place, the straight posture that came back naturally. For a moment, he saw himself as the young soldier from 40 years ago. It's perfect, commented Brian, who had come in to help. I don't feel like myself anymore, Walter admitted. You've always been this man, Brian replied. You just forgot for a while. At 11 o'clock, the special guests began to arrive. Walter watched from the window, trying to identify familiar faces among the officers getting out of the cars. Mr. Walter, the Major called, there's someone here who would like to see you. Walter turned around and almost fainted. In the doorway stood a man of about 70, hair completely white, but with eyes he would recognize anywhere. Michael, Walter whispered. Walter, my brother. The older man approached with open arms. Michael Bennett had been the team sergeant during Operation Night Falcon. He was the most experienced man in the group and had saved Walter's life several times during the mission. I can't believe you're here, Walter said, hugging his friend tightly. When I heard they had found you, I cancelled all my appointments and came immediately, Michael explained, also emotional. How are you? What have you been doing all these years? Walter asked, holding his friend's hands. I became a teacher, Michael smiled. Taught history for 30 years, and you? A mechanic, Walter replied. Until recently. I heard you went through some hard times, Michael said with regret. Forgive me for not looking for you sooner. How could you look for me when I was officially dead? Walter laughed. None of us knew. That's true, Michael agreed. This whole story is surreal. Is anyone else coming? Walter asked, hopefully. Yes, Michael smiled. You're going to be surprised. Before he could explain further, they were interrupted by the arrival of a taxi at the base entrance. A woman of about 40 got out of the vehicle, looking around nervously. Is that your daughter? Michael asked. It's my Jennifer, Walter confirmed, his eyes shining. They hurried down to greet her. When Jennifer saw her father in the military uniform, she immediately started to cry. Dad! She shouted, running into his arms. My girl? Walter hugged her tightly, unable to hold back his own tears. You look so different, she said, touching the uniform. So distinguished. It's borrowed, Walter laughed. But it makes me feel young again. Dad, I want you to know something, Jennifer said, holding his face in her hands. I always knew you were special. Mum told me some things about your military past, about how brave you were. Your mother talked too much. Walter smiled. She spoke with pride, Jennifer corrected, and now I understand why. Michael approached discreetly. Jennifer, Walter said, this is Michael, my friend of many years. We served together. It's a pleasure to meet you, Michael said, shaking Jennifer's hand. Your father always talked about you a lot during missions. He talked about me. Jennifer was surprised. All the time, Michael confirmed. He said he had a beautiful daughter who would be his greatest achievement in life. Dad, Jennifer got emotional again. It's true, Walter confirmed. You were always my priority, even when I couldn't show it. The family reunion was interrupted by the arrival of more guests. General Miller stepped out of an official car, accompanied by other high-ranking officers. Mr. Walter, the general said as he approached, are you ready for the ceremony? Yes, sir, Walter replied, straightening his posture. And this must be your daughter, the general smiled at Jennifer. Yes, sir, Jennifer Thompson, she introduced herself. It's an honor to meet the daughter of a national hero, the general said cordially. Thank you, General, Jennifer replied, clearly impressed by the whole situation. We have one more surprise, the general announced, but it will be during the ceremony. They proceeded to the main courtyard, where a small set of bleachers had been set up. Soldiers from across the base were lined up in formation, and various civilian and military dignitaries occupied seats of honor. "There are so many people," Walter murmured nervously. "They all came to honor you," the general explained. "Relax and enjoy the moment." The ceremony began with the national anthem, performed by the base's military band. Walter sang along, feeling a deep emotion upon hearing the song he had sung so many times during his military youth. "My father is crying," Jennifer whispered to Michael. "Those are tears of pride," Michael explained. "He has been waiting for this moment for 40 years. After the anthem, the general took the microphone. "Officers, soldiers, dignitaries and guests," he began, "we are here today to correct a historical injustice." The courtyard fell into absolute silence. For 4 decades, a man has lived in anonymity, forgotten by bureaucracy, ignored by the system he swore to defend, the general continued. "Today, we are here to publicly recognize the heroism, dedication and sacrifice of former soldier Walter Thompson." Applause echoed through the courtyard. In 1983, during Operation Night Falcon, this man risked and nearly lost his life to save Canadian diplomats who had been kidnapped by guerrillas, the general went on. "He was tortured, scarred, left for dead, but he never revealed any information that could compromise national security." The silence was reverent. All these years, Walter Thompson continued to serve his country in other ways, the general continued. As a mechanic, as a devoted husband, as a loving father, as an exemplary citizen. Even when the country forgot him, he never forgot his values. Jennifer was crying openly, finally understanding the full measure of the man who was her father. "And now," the general announced, "I would like to invite Mr. Walter Thompson to receive the honors he has always deserved." Walter stood up, his legs trembling slightly. He walked to the center of the courtyard, where the general waited with a velvet box. "For exceptional service to the nation," the general announced solemnly, "I present to Mr. Walter Thompson the Medal of Military Merit." The general opened the box, revealing a beautiful, shining medal. Carefully, he pinned it onto Walter's uniform. "Thank you, General," Walter said, his voice choked with emotion. "The thanks are ours," the general replied. "But the surprises aren't over," the general continued, looking toward the courtyard entrance. "I would like to invite 2 more heroes of Operation Night Falcon to join us." Walter followed the general's gaze and nearly fainted. 2 elderly men were walking toward the courtyard, both wearing impeccable military uniforms. "Charles? Peter?" Walter whispered, immediately recognizing the aged but familiar faces. Charles Wilson and Peter Anderson had been in charge of communications during the operation. Walter hugged them tightly, all of them crying without a care for the audience. "My brothers," Walter murmured. "You're here." "We wouldn't have missed this for anything," Charles said emotionally. "When we found out you were alive, we couldn't believe it," Peter added. "Of the 20 men who entered the jungle," and the general announced to the crowd, "only 12 returned. Of those 12, only 5 are still alive. 3 of them are here with us today." The ovation was thunderous. Soldiers, officers and civilians rose to their feet in applause, honoring not just Walter, but all the veterans present. "And now," the general said, when the applause died down, "I would like to invite Mr. Walter to say a few words." Walter approached the microphone, clearly nervous. He looked at the crowd, then at his daughter, then at his veteran friends. He began, his voice faltering. He stopped, took a deep breath, and tried again. "I am not a hero," he finally said. "I am just a man who did what I believed was right. For 40 years I have carried the memories of that operation with me, the faces of the comrades who did not return, the weight of the decisions we made, the scars that never fully healed." He unconsciously touched the mark on his arm. "There were times I wondered if it had all been worth it," he continued, "times of doubt, of pain, of loneliness. But today, looking at all of you, seeing my proud daughter reuniting with my brothers in battle, I understand that it was. Not for the recognition, not for the medals, but for the lives we managed to save, for the values we defended, for the country we helped protect. To the young soldiers who are here," Walter looked directly at Brian, Tyler, Brandon and Derek, "I want to say that true heroism is not the absence of fear. but the courage to do what is right even when you are afraid. It doesn't matter if anyone recognizes it or not, if there are medals or not, if there is applause or not. What matters is that you know, deep in your hearts, that you made a difference. And to my daughter, Walter looked directly at Jennifer, I want to say that you have always been my greatest medal, my greatest pride, my greatest achievement. Thank you all for this unforgettable day. Thank you for reminding me of who I really am. The courtyard erupted in applause again. Jennifer ran to hug her father, followed by Michael, Charles, and Peter. It was a moment of pure emotion and recognition. After the official ceremony, there was a special lunch in the mess hall. Walter found himself seated at the head table, surrounded by his daughter, his veteran friends, and the senior officers. "Dad," Jennifer said during the meal, "I want you to know I've made a decision." "What decision?" "I'm going to open a consulting office here in San Diego," she announced. "I want to work on veteran issues, help people like you get their rights." "Sweetheart, you don't have to do this because of me," Walter protested. "It's not just because of you," she explained. "During those years in Canada, I worked on similar issues there. I saw how important it is to have someone who understands the unique challenges veterans face." "It's an excellent idea," the general approved. "We have many cases like your father's, and I will help you," Michael offered. "I have experience in education, and I know many veterans who need support." "We will too," Charles and Peter confirmed together. "Then our team is formed," Jennifer smiled. "The Night Falcon Foundation." "I like the name," Walter approved, moved by the idea of his daughter dedicating her career to helping others like him. The rest of the day passed in conversation, reminiscing, and planning for the future. When it was time to leave, Walter said goodbye to each person who had made that day possible. "Sergeant Derek," he called to the young officer who had initially mistreated him. "Yes, sir," Derek approached, still visibly embarrassed by the events of the previous morning. "I want you to know I hold no resentment," Walter said. "You were doing your job." "Thank you for your generosity, sir," Derek replied. "I promise I will never judge someone by appearances again." "That is the most important lesson," Walter confirmed. "And soldiers." He called Brian, Tyler, and Brandon. "Yes, sir," they replied in unison. "Always remember, true soldiers protect not just with their weapons, but with their compassion and discernment." "Yes, sir," they confirmed, clearly moved by the experience. As he left the base, Walter looked back one more time. The place that had been the scene of his greatest humiliation had become the setting for his redemption. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Jennifer asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about how strange life is," he replied. "Yesterday I was a beggar in the eyes of those soldiers. Today I am a national hero." "You were always a hero," Jennifer said. "You just didn't have the right people to recognize it." "Perhaps," Walter smiled. "Or perhaps I needed everything that happened to get here." "What do you mean?" "If my life had been easy, if I had received recognition from the start, maybe I wouldn't understand the suffering of other veterans," he explained. "Maybe I wouldn't have the same compassion, the same desire to help." "I never thought about it that way," Jennifer admitted. "Sometimes our greatest sufferings prepare us for our greatest purposes," Walter reflected. That night, staying in a comfortable hotel, courtesy of the Army, Walter called Michael. "How are you feeling?" Michael asked. "Confused," Walter admitted. "Happy, grateful, but confused." "Why?" "For 40 years, my identity was based on being the forgotten veteran, the unrecognized hero," Walter explained. "Now I don't know who I am anymore." "You are the same person you've always been," Michael assured him. "It's just that now the world knows it too." "And you? How do you feel seeing all this again?" "Nostalgic," Michael admitted. "It reminds me of when we were young and thought we could change the world." "Maybe we still can," Walter suggested. "In a different way." "We certainly can," Michael agreed. "By the way, I got calls from other veterans today." The news spread quickly. "And what did they say?" "That they want help," Michael explained. "They want to know how to get their benefits, how to deal with trauma, how to reconnect with their families." "So our mission is just beginning," Walter concluded. "Exactly." End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this story of overcoming and recognition? Do you believe Walter made the right decisions throughout his life? Share your thoughts in the comments about how we should treat our veterans and unsung heroes. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the story, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting narratives like this one.